Hi, my name is Laura Reber. I'm a school psychologist and I'm the founder of Progress Parade. At Progress Parade, we are a group of online special education tutors and educational therapists. So I'm really excited today to spend a little bit of time answering the common question, what is an educational therapist? Now, if you have never heard or very newly heard the term educational therapist, I can promise you you're not alone. It's a pretty new term and it can be pretty confusing. It sounds like pretty fancy, like what is educational? It's like education plus therapy. I don't really understand what that means. So that can be overwhelming. So my goal today is to just come up with some simple analogies and explanations that can help you kind of grasp what this term means. So bear with me. I might I'm going to draw out a long analogy with doctors. I hope it's not too long, but I do think it's a really great analogy to understand what an educational therapist is. So some people say educational therapy is not tutoring. That is not our approach here at Progress Parade. We really see educational therapy as a specialized subset of tutors. So kind of all tutors are not educational therapists, but all educational therapists really are tutors because we are working one-on-one, usually with students on academics, which most people think of as tutoring. So no need to overcomplicate it. I'll go over some similarities and differences, but there are a lot of similarities. So that's one thing that can kind of help you understand it. So some things that are similar, like I've said, we usually meet one-on-one or in very small groups for educational therapy, and that's kind of how people think of tutoring too. Usually we work on areas of academic challenges. That's where the term educational comes in to educational therapy. So just like tutoring, we're usually working on challenges around academics. So those, if you want to call it tutoring, we're not going to be offended here at Progress Parade. We do some special education tutoring, and it's really pretty similar in a lot of ways. Now, some differences between educational therapy and tutoring are that really the biggest difference, I think, is in the specialty of educational therapy, an educational therapist. So a lot of times we will work with students with ADHD, autism, learning disabilities like dyslexia, and learning disabilities in math and writing, and then also some executive functioning challenges. So the level of specialty and training of the tutor, that they are licensed and trained and ready to teach those specialized needs. And then also a lot of times the goals can be different. Like in tutoring, the goal might be to raise a test score or to pass a class or to get your grade up. In educational therapy, the goals are usually longer term, like building confidence, getting over anxiety around school, building long-term planning skills, and preparing a student for kind of using those skills from educational therapy for situations they might encounter beyond educational therapy. So it's kind of differences in the specialty and the goals, but the format and kind of appearance is pretty similar to tutoring. So I think to kind of draw this to help you understand more how tutoring and educational therapy are related. I think tutoring is something that people understand pretty well, so that's why I like to kind of use it as a jumping off point for educational therapy. So we like to think of it as think of a doctor analogy. So I'm kind of going to follow this specialist train. We've all been to a doctor when we have like a stuffy nose or maybe a sore throat, and say the doctor, maybe looks at our throat, looks up our nose with a light, maybe does some basic tests, and then decides to do something that most of us have experienced, like going on antibiotics. So that's a pretty basic, kind of intervention, if you want to call it that. So, our doctor will put us through the basic intervention of antibiotics. And then if that doesn't work, then we're going to probably have to go back to a specialist. Maybe the doctor will refer us to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, or somebody maybe the doctor suspects we now have an allergy, and that's what's causing us to have a sore throat and runny nose. So the doctor might make a referral specifically to somebody who knows what they're doing for the needs that we have. That's really similar to tutoring versus educational therapy. With tutoring, it's kind of a first line of defense. We don't really know what's going on, so let's just try to get us some help. And then educational therapy is like beyond that. Like now we know we need a specialty. It's not just tutoring, it's something a little bit more. So hopefully that analogy helps break it down. I'm going to break it down with some more examples with tutoring and educational therapy and comparing it to that doctor analogy. So sometimes that you might need educational therapy are, one, if you have had your teacher repeatedly bring up concerns about your child's performance at school, and it's something that the teacher says is a repeated concern, and it's not just a minor thing. It's something that is kind of a big concern, and that they think maybe they've said, have you considered taking your child to the pediatrician to get evaluated for ADHD? Or maybe they've brought up, concerns with attention or learning challenges or things like that. It's not a minor concern, it's a bigger concern. So that would be a time that your child probably needs an educational therapist rather than a tutor. Similar to a doctor, if your doctor, in this analogy, the teacher's kind of like the doctor, where the doctor's saying, I've done what I can do, and now we need a specialist on here. That's kind of the similar thing. And then the next example to think about is if your child has actually been through an assessment, whether that's an assessment at school or a private evaluation, and then comes out with a diagnosis like ADHD, a learning disability, dyslexia, executive functioning challenges. If your child has been through an evaluation and has a learning challenge diagnosed or ADHD, that's probably another time that your student would benefit from educational therapy instead of tutoring. And again, same thing with the doctor analogy. Say your doctor runs a first round of tests and then comes up with some elevated levels of something that they feel like they can't help, then they're going to refer you to that specialist. So that's a similar kind of analogy there. And then finally, say you've tried a general tutoring company. I'm not going to name any names, but there's a lot of tutoring companies that we've all heard of out there. Maybe you've tried that and that's not really working for your student. So similar to visiting your general practitioner first and then getting referred to a specialist, starting with a general tutoring company, seeing it's not working and seeing that you need something a little more specialized, that's another time that you probably need an educational therapist. So I hope I didn't draw that doctor analogy out too much. I just really wanted to show there's lots of parallels that we are all familiar with between something that's like similar in what they're doing and the method that they're doing it, but the nature and the specialty is a lot different. I think that's really the difference between tutoring, which we're all familiar with, and educational therapists, which we might not be so familiar with. So I think hopefully that's helped you understand a little bit more about what the difference is. Some common backgrounds of educational therapists are special education teachers are a big one, school psychologists, reading specialists are all common. Teachers who might be trained in things like Orton Gillingham or Wilson. I'm not going to get into those too much right now, but essentially those are methods for teaching reading that lots of students with dyslexia like, and then executive functioning coaches as well. It's important to know that there aren't there's no control over the phrase educational therapist or the term. So anybody can really call themselves an educational therapist. And that's different than other therapist variations you might have heard. So speech therapists have, licenses they have to go through in order to call themselves that. Occupational therapists, same thing, have license. Mental health therapists, like counselors, same thing. So for educational therapists, you really do have to do your own kind of vetting, since it's not a term that there's any specific license for. If that's something that intimidates you, that's something we can definitely help with here at Progress Parade. We do all of our vetting and interviewing of our tutors, and we also interview all of our parents so that we have an understanding of what your child needs and can match them with that perfect subspecialty within the realm of educational therapist. It would be really unrealistic to think that one educational therapist could help with any need that comes through. Similar to specialized doctors, like that same analogy, educational therapists have specialties too, so it's important to get the right specialty matched with the right need from a student or from your child. So that's something that we can help you take care of as well. So I hope this video has been helpful. If you want to talk more, please do visit us at progressparade.com. You can find lots of resources about educational therapy, about autism, about ADHD and learning disabilities on our resources page. And you can, of course, book a free consultation at any time, and we'd love to discuss your student further.